Good morning, Green Spring. Today we have Stephen Rogers, and he and his wife Ken have lived here in Crestwood Court at Green Spring for about 2 years. He was a career Foreign Service officer, and for over 37 years. And his last assignment, he was the ambassador to Swaziland. So, Steve, welcome to Channel 6 and the Who's Who program.
Thank you.
Would you tell us a little bit about your immediate family, your children, what they...
Well, we have 4 children and 6 grandchildren.
Wow.
And they keep us busy from time to time. We do see them relatively often, even though they are stretched out there in California and Minnesota and Massachusetts and Virginia.
And McLean.
McLean, that's right.
Yeah. So, and what do they do?
All different things. Sort of a disappointment to me, none of them followed Ken and me into the Foreign Service.
Okay.
But one works for the World Bank, and that's sort of close.
Yeah.
But one's a psychologist, and one is working on spreading the word about things that are important to the environment.
Oh.
That is saving the world, and one of them's a part-time teacher, and all. So they all do useful things.
Good. Well, what about your early life? What about your parents and your siblings? Where did you grow up?
Yeah, I grew up in on Long Island, in Port Washington, and elsewhere, but basically as a New Yorker.
Yeah.
For the most part.
And you were born in Flushing, right?
Born in Flushing,
yeah.
Yes.
Which is part of Queens.
It's in Queens,
yeah.
Yes.
Just right. It's close to Port Washington. It's just west of Port. Yeah. Okay.
That's right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And your parents, what did they do?
They both grew up in New England.
Oh.
And they.
Vermont, Massachusetts, or?
Sorry?
You say New England, is it Massachusetts or Vermont,
or? Well, Vermont and Massachusetts and New England, elsewhere.
Oh, okay. So, and what'd your dad do?
He was in the publishing business, publishing textbooks.
Textbooks.
So he always had an interest in textbooks and in books.
I don't know about them, but I would think that's pretty lucrative now.
It may be now. It wasn't particularly then, unfortunately.
Yeah, because the textbooks would last a while and they didn't cost very much, and now they cost you $100 and some bucks and whatever, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, so you went to school in Lexington, Massachusetts, and Port Washington, New York. How did you get to Lexington, Massachusetts?
Well, Dad was transferred to Lexington from.
So he established a
Flushing
publishing company up in Lexington, is it?
Yeah,
yeah,
that's right.
That was kind of fun, I'll bet, living up in Lexington, where the first shot was heard around the world.
Yes,
it's a very historic area.
It is indeed, and we celebrate Paul Revere's ride every year, of course.
Well, as a youngster, you must have been, 5 to 10 years old at the time?
In that range.
So you weren't really probably overwhelmed by the history of it?
Not overwhelmed, but we were certainly aware of it.
Huh?
And that was important.
Okay. Anything special about elementary, or where'd you go to high school, in Port Washington?
Went to high school in Port Washington, yes.
Anything special about either elementary or high school?
No, I don't think so. It was a pretty good school system, and
did you play any sports in high school?
Tennis, a little bit, but not much. Tennis.
Tennis? Okay.
Some.
Okay. Well, now, you went to Princeton. What led you to Princeton?
Well, that's a good question. Actually, the Navy decided I'd go to
is that right?
Princeton because I applied for a scholarship a naval ROTC scholarship.
Okay.
And actually, I found out I was admitted to Princeton earlier than when I found out about being admitted to Princeton, but found out about the Navy before I found out about Princeton.
Okay.
But anyway, the Navy sent me to Princeton, and that was fine.
So when you graduated from high school, you decided did you want to go in the Navy, or
Well,
Korea was on at the time, as I recall.
yes, that's right.
Did you decide that you really would like to get into the ROTC and become a Navy career officer, or just was that part of your
It was a scholarship.
scholarship?
It
Okay.
was cheaper. I don't know what we would have done if I hadn't gotten that, but that worked.
Well, that worked well.
So I spent 4 years at Princeton in the NROTC.
Did the Navy have anything to do with choosing what you studied?
There was one course all the way through in naval science,
The Navy ROTC, yeah.
which was a little offbeat for me. I mean, it wasn't part of my main interest, but it was interesting. You know, there were things about the Navy that I found interesting, and engineering and other aspects of naval life. So I was thoroughly involved in the Navy for those 4 years.
No, no. That's good. But your major was public and international affairs or something?
Yes.
Yeah.
I went to the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton.
Do you remember why you wanted to study? That's kind of a different area.
No, that's easy. I was always interested in what was going on in the world, and that was partly because of my parents' interest, and mainly my mother's interest. She was interested in the world and wanted to know what was going on, and so I followed that. And
was that what caused her interest in? What caused her interest
you
in?
know,
Any idea?
You remember that? You probably remember too that was a time of tremendous activity here in the world, at
The war in China.
in the world, the war,
Yeah.
so forth. And I was very interested in maps and what maps told us and everything, and so that interested me.
Okay. So you graduated from Princeton. Anything special at Princeton? Did you participate in any sports there, tennis or?
Some tennis, but not terribly much.
Yeah.
But it was a good introduction to what's going on in the world, and we had seminars and all about different aspects of world activities.
You probably had a lot of famous people come and speak to you.
We had some of those.
I bet. All right. Well, then you graduated from Princeton and you went into the Navy.
1952.
Yeah. And what were some of your experiences in the Navy? What?
Well, I spent 3 years on a destroyer in the Pacific, on the USS Halsey Powell. Incidentally, our son Halsey is not named for the Halsey Powell. That's quite quite different. Oh no, very different.
What's he named for?
Well, he was not named for the Navy at all, but just that he. But he.
Was it a family name? It wasn't Admiral Halsey, was it?
No, it wasn't Admiral Halsey.
But it was, I was intrigued by the fact that he was named Halsey and you were on the Halsey. I just thought
that's coincidence.
Okay.
Totally coincidence.
Then you went from the Navy. You went into Columbia University and studied economics.
When I graduated, or when I finished my time in the Navy, the 3 years that I was required to serve on active duty, I sort of wondered what to do next. And I decided I should go to grad school. Grad school in what? Well, I had enjoyed economics as an undergraduate, and so that's where I went at that point for just over a year. So that wasn't a whole lot of economics, but it was interesting to me. And economics has been an interest of mine since. And in fact, that's a large part of what I have done in the Foreign Service as an economic officer.
Did you have any idea of going into the Foreign Service when you went to Columbia? Or did that come later?
No, that was part of the picture.
Was it? Okay. Had you approached the State Department about being in the Foreign Service before you went to Columbia?
I'd always been interested in the Foreign Service and in world affairs, so that I had that in mind before I even went to Princeton.
Oh, okay.
So that was.
Well, how did you hear about Foreign Service officers? Because, you know, that's not everybody's aware of Foreign Service officers.
No, but in those years, in the 1940s, of course, there was more interest just because of the world and world events, world affairs, and so forth, which interested me. I think it was my mother who was most interested in the world in my family in that time. She belonged to the League of Women Voters and all that sort of thing.
So her enthusiasm about the world really created an interest.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand that. All right. Well, you got into the State Department as a Foreign Service officer, and your first assignment was, of course, learning about what went on in the State Department, I presume.
Yeah.
Sort of initial 2-year tour and your first then external assignment was New Delhi, India.
Yes.
That must have been exciting.
Well, it was certainly interesting. It wasn't where I asked to go, but it's where they sent us. And Kent and I were both very interested in India and what goes on there.
So that was not a request on your part.
That was definitely not a request, but we went there and found it fascinating and still find it. You know, that's one of the things about this, that we maintain our interest in the places we've been to, including India.
Well, you lived there a couple of years.
Yes.
So you really had a chance to learn something about the country, the people.
Yeah.
And that's different from going on a tour, a 2-week tour, where people see the country, but that's all they do, and they don't understand anything about the people.
And we traveled some in India, a little bit inhibited by the fact that by that time we had a daughter who was 6 months old when we got to India, and that
was Chris?
That's Chris. Yeah. Very good. And interestingly, she has grown up. She's now 50-odd years old. I don't know how that happened.
We didn't say that.
No, that's right. But she maintains an interest in India, as all of us do. But we never went back to India. We had our 2 years there, and that was it.
Well, you know, my children spent 3 years in Greece and Turkey, and they look back on that as a very interesting part of their life, and I think they probably might even call it a favorite period of their life, but that's beside the point. Well, you came back then from Delhi and you went to Harvard.
Yes.
Now, was that I presume was sponsored by the State Department?
That's right. The State Department sent us to Cambridge for.
And you got your master's in public affairs? Or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Master's in economics, actually.
Oh, economics. Okay.
Yes.
So, once you got your master's, then you had a new assignment. Was this a request to go to Paris?
I sort of went where they told me to go.
Oh, I had a question about that. In the Army, we always put in our dream sheet, we called it, of where we'd like to go. Did you do the same in Foreign Service?
Something like that.
And then they sent you where they wanted to.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
And
so you went to Paris. How did you compare that with New Delhi?
not much relationship. we were in Paris actually twice at that point. Then later in our career, we spent 3 or 4 years in Paris, and still enjoy Paris very much. Although we had that 2 years in London, and when we think about where we would like to go back and look again, London is what comes to mind first for me.
Yeah, you had, well, that was a few years later.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but you're an economic officer.
Yes.
At this point, and what was your job as the economic officer?
Well, we were reporting to Washington on things having to do with economics, both about what's going on in the host country that's important in economics, and what's important for U.S. economic policy for our relations, economic relations, and with the host country.
Yeah. Now, you came back to the State Department, and you were in the Bureau of European Affairs.
Yeah.
Now, what were you doing? You still were in the economic section, I presume.
Well, it was mostly economics, but that was a time when it was very important negotiations were going on in Europe, and I spent a good deal of that time.
What kind of negotiations?
Well, for creating the common market.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that would have been an exciting time.
Yeah.
Now, we also had Vietnam going on, and we had Cyprus, and we had the Greek coup, and
those things were going on. They weren't in my
area,
my field, but we were interested in how Europe was proceeding in its integration, which, of course, the vital point for us was having Britain join the common market. And that didn't happen while I was there, but it happened later. And then, of course, now, unfortunately, some of us would say, Britain is no longer a member of the common market of the European community.
Oh, okay. They're not now. London isn't? Well, they
Well,
are still, aren't they?
They're still working
in
on
the
it.
process of getting out.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, well, then you went to the Industrial College of the Armed Forces. That's sort of a feather in your cap. Did you request that, or is that, again,
No, it
just happened?
that just happened. The State Department was interested in having people at the Industrial College, like at the War College and others, other senior.
Well, and 10 years later, you came back as a professor.
Yes. They didn't have anything else to do with me, but they came back, and we were back in Paris. That was the second time we were in Paris, and we certainly enjoyed getting back to Paris.
Yeah. Okay, that was after you went back to Paris as a counselor. Now, what's the difference between a counselor and an economic? You're in charge of people, I presume.
I had a number of people under my jurisdiction. In my jurisdiction, I would report to the ambassador and to Washington on different aspects of that.
Okay, you came back to the state as in the Bureau of Inter-American Affairs. Now, that I presume that includes Central America, South America.
Yeah.
So, now was that part of your desire, or was that something the state decided you ought to be doing?
An interesting experience, because at that point, Henry Kissinger had decided that Foreign Service officers at the State Department ought to have more variety in its experience. And we had too many cases for his liking, anyway, of people who spent their whole career in one country and who became very expert in it, but didn't deepen their knowledge. So Mr. Kissinger, Secretary Kissinger, arranged for people to go elsewhere.
Okay.
This under a program of variety of changing assignments. So my changed assignment was to go to Latin America, which it's interesting, and that was fine, but that wasn't what I expected.
Mexico City, huh?
Mexico City, that's right.
Well, now, how did your work in Mexico compare with the work in Europe?
Well, in Mexico City, we were more looking at U.S. relations directly with the host government and our business relationships and all that. So that wasn't what I had expected, but that's not bad.
Yeah.
It was very interesting. We enjoyed Mexico very much.
Yeah. Now, your family went with you on each of these tours, right? So
yes.
they got to enjoy the different cultures and
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now you're transforming again as a senior policy advisor to the Bureau of Oceans and International Environmental. Just what was that?
Well, that was
In scientific affairs.
yes, that was a short assignment, but an interesting one.
Yeah.
But
it was quite different, wasn't it?
Very different,
Yeah.
yes. And yeah, it was interesting. It wasn't the kind of thing I had expected to be doing, but that's all right. You don't expect it.
Okay, now you get switched to South Africa.
At the end of our tour, that tour in Washington, I was given a choice of where I would go next, but we chose to go to South Africa as one of the possibilities. I felt that South Africa at that point, when they were in the dealing with the problem of apartheid and all that.
This was prior to Mandela.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was very different from what we'd had before, but we enjoyed.
I was surprised that the government is in 3 different locations.
Yeah.
The executive's in Pretoria, and Cape Town has the legislative, and judicial is at some unpronounceable name. What was it?
Well, for part of the year we were in Pretoria, and then halfway through the year, the government, the South African government, would move its main activities, the ambassadors go and so forth, to Johannesburg. So there was that change.
Well, now, what was it, Johannesburg? We had the
There's a
executive up at Pretoria.
The consulate general in Cape Town, and so the ambassador and many other people moved there for half of the year, leaving me in charge of what was left in Pretoria.
Yeah. But it would seem to me that with the 3 different parts of government in different cities, quite far apart. I mean, they're not. That would make it governing very difficult.
Well, we've coped with it.
Yeah.
That's been part of it. The people who went to Cape Town, of course, were always very pleased to go to Cape Town because that's such a beautiful city. Those of us who are left in.
Well, Pretoria is too, isn't it? A beautiful city.
Yes, actually it is.
Yeah.
That's right.
And I couldn't pronounce the other town.
Bloemfontein.
Okay.
Bloemfontein is the judicial capital.
Yeah.
and where the high court is and so on.
Okay. Was there a lot of unrest because of apartheid?
Oh yes.
And you saw it in all of throughout the whole country?
It was an interesting time to be, especially interesting time to be in South Africa because of the unrest and all.
Yeah.
And because things were happening, they were approaching resolution of the apartheid problem, which didn't happen until after we had left, but soon after we had left South Africa.
Yeah, about 93 is that one?
Yeah.
All right, from there you go become the ambassador to Swaziland.
Yes, that was kind of interesting because I thought my career was about over at that point, but the then ambassador to Swaziland was hauled off to do something else, and they needed somebody to fill that spot, and I put my hand up saying, I'm certainly willing to go there, otherwise I would have had to leave the Foreign Service at that point because of time and grade and all of that.
I thought that might be kind of a plum for the Foreign Service officers, a final.
Well, not everybody would think of it that way, but I certainly did.
Yeah, okay.
Kent and I did. We enjoyed Swaziland very much.
And you moved over into to Swaziland.
Right.
For that time, well, you still had some children at home, didn't you?
They were beginning to leave, but they all they all came to see us in Swaziland. They've all been to all of these countries where we had been.
Tell us where Swaziland is.
Well, it's almost surrounded by South Africa, but not quite. There's a little area where there's a border with Mozambique.
Okay.
We got there too, but
and that's on the coast, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Swaziland is landlocked.
Swaziland is landlocked. That's right.
How big is it?
About 1 million people.
And what's the size?
Well, it's I don't know how many square feet or square miles it is, but it's a very small country.
About 100 miles in length and
could have been.
And 80 miles and 700 square miles.
I can see you've done your homework on this better than I have.
Yeah, I did look it up because I didn't know where Swaziland is either.
But that was nice. You know, Swaziland's an interesting country and a very pretty country.
Yeah.
It has
and it's run by a king.
Yes, run by a king who was. What was he, 21 years old when we got there, or maybe less than that?
All right, well, we're down to our last bit. So you retired.
I
moved
retired.
Back to Annandale in the house you bought in '64, and you lived there until you moved to Green Spring. What did you do in retirement?
We traveled a good deal to places we hadn't been to, and enjoyed that. We played tennis. We were members of the tennis club, and we were quite active in local government and so forth. So we kept busy, and then.
Well, then you came to Green Spring about 2 years ago.
Yes.
How did you choose Green Spring?
Well, because we knew so many people here.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yes, we knew a lot of people here.
Yeah.
People whom we had known through our church in Annandale and elsewhere, and it just worked very well. Mm-hmm. People had good reports of what Green Spring was like, and so we chose that.
Yeah. Have you enjoyed it?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's been very nice.
Well, you know, you have to downsize, you have to move, but once you get here, it's pretty darn good living.
It's very nice, yes.
Yeah.
Of course, we downsized, so we left a lot of things behind.
I'm sure you did.
But we still go back to Annandale, where we lived. We do our shopping there, as a matter of fact, and some other things.
Well, Steve, thank you very much for coming on Who's Who. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have.
Well, that's
I've learned a lot from what you did in life. That's, and I hope others did. And I hope you enjoyed Steve's story of what he did.
Well, I enjoyed this, talking with you, and it's always nice to review where we've been and all that.
I'm sure it is. Thank you.
So thank you, Gray.
We have a few announcements here. The Resident Council September meeting will be on today at 2 and 8 p.m. And it's a beautiful day. That was Chorister's presentation a few days ago at 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. And Friday on Village in Motion, we have Vantage Point Living Life in Green Spring. And of course, we have that Green Spring Troubadour. Then the Video Time Machine, Queen Victoria's Most Unusual Servant, that was on November the 29th, 2013, will be on Saturday and Sunday at 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. And I'd like to, the Friday, I think it is the end of the day or end of the week that we're supposed to be or have turned in the survey, the Halloran survey. And if you haven't turned it in, please do, because we really need to have a sufficient number of surveys turned in for it to be a valid survey.